All right, good day to you, AP people. This is going to be a quick review of the American Pageant, Chapter 28. Chapter 28 is all about progressivism and the Republican president, so they're talking about Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt's presidency is going to be really revolutionary in a lot of ways. It is known as the square deal, his domestic policy, and that quote at the beginning of the chapter kind of gives you a good idea of where that comes from, and what the motives for his administration are. You know, not to give people handouts, but to provide, at least an even playing field for everyone, so that people can be free to pursue their own dreams in a fair environment, both politically and economically. So what is progressivism? Well, progressivism is going to be a really kind of multi-effort, by a lot of groups who want to see a lot of society's problems be solved. The problem is the Industrial Revolution has created such huge problems, and urbanization has become, such an extensive thing that there are so many problems out there that are too large for individuals to fix, and it had been kind of the interpretation in American history where, you were on your own to fix your own problems, and that idea of self-reliance, is so entrenched in American kind of mentalities. And that still matters, except that these problems that we've got are going to be so large that people are going to have to turn to the government to try to get some of these problems fixed. So this is going to be, a strengthening of the state, for human welfare. And this is going to be the end of that kind of laissez-faire government that, Thomas Jefferson and some of those guys were so into. The social gospel, this is just simply applying Christian ethics to progressive ideas, trying to use religious teaching to also to solve society's problems. So it's progressive and religious at the same time, taking care of the poor and the disenfranchised. In the progressive era, we're at the beginning of, the 1900s here. You've got a huge amount of inequality economically out there, and it's only going to be getting worse. It's really going to be exacerbated by post-1980s economics under the Reagan administration. So they're going to give you some stats in the book. In 1896, 12% of the people controlled 90% of the population. That has become much more concentrated, where the wealth is now concentrated. Maybe you've heard of the 1% out there. Well, as of 2017, I think it's now less than 1% of the population controls 90% of the wealth, and the other 99% of us are, fighting over that last remaining 5%. So is that fair? No. And progressives are going to try to seek all kinds of inequality that they find in society for the greater good. Teddy Roosevelt is going to coin a term for, journalists and writers who are going to, what he calls, rake the muck. Stir the crap of society up so that people can really see it and smell it. And some of the guys mentioned in the readings are Lincoln Stevens, The Shame of the Cities, looking at big business and municipal government and the corruption thereof. Ida Tarbell is going to write a scathing history of the Standard Oil Company. She's personally invested in that. Her dad was an oil man, and John Rockefeller's company came in and bankrupted him. So her expose of this monopoly is going to be really, really good reading for a lot of progressives. Thomas Lawson, Frenzied Finance, practices of stock market traders. David Phillips, The Treason of the Senate, and how the Senate becomes the millionaires club because they don't represent the will of the people anymore. They are now more beholden to trusts. Ray Stannard Baker, The Color Line here, talking about the expose of blacks in the United States and how African Americans, 90% of them still lived in the South, 33% still illiterate here so many years after the Civil War. And this is going to be a trend where, to be black in America in the early 1900s, the connotation is that you're going to be living in the southern states still, and you are going to be living in a rural capacity. The Great Migration with World War I is going to try to change that, and then the connotation from 1914 all the way up until after World War II is going to be this Great Migration where to be black in America, all of a sudden the connotation is that you live in a northern place, you live in an urban setting. So that's going to switch. But Ray Stannard Baker's book is, talking about that kind of pre-Great Migration plight of African Americans in the United States. John Spargo is going to write an expose on child labor called "The Bitter Cry of the Children," and all of these, are going to be really, really interesting writings. Taking a look at all kinds of different social ills that are too large for individuals to fix, but that progressives think that the government can fix. There's an expose here, or an essay, excuse me, by Werner Sombarts, "Why Is There No Socialism in the United States?" And he basically highlights 4 ways. Like, we already have a pretty egalitarian society, the safety valve of the frontier, and that's Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis, that when things go bad in the eastern cities, people can just move west for a better life, and that provides kind of a safety valve protecting our government from revolution. He also says that the American working class, the proletariat, they already have a pretty high standard of living, and they already have a say in government, so there's really no need to overthrow the government in favor of a more socialist one. And so, even still today, if you get called a socialist in the United States, there's still negative connotations to that. Politics are going to be reformed during the progressive era. There's all kinds of different ways that we're going to change our political system. The direct primary for choosing candidates, the initiative, really grassroots law, ideas being, brought up by the people themselves, referendum, voting on whether or not these things should be done or not. The recall is a way to get corrupt politicians or bad laws kind of, voted out. Campaign finance reform, trying to restrict money that can be donated to candidates, still a great idea for us today. I think we should go back to more of that. The Australian ballot, the secret ballot, that's going to be something that's intended to, start to curb the influence of political machines, especially in big cities. And then direct election of senators, the 17th Amendment's big for that. Female suffrage, also this movement really starts to gain real momentum. So pay attention to all those 8 different ways that the progressives are going to try to change the political spectrum in the United States and reform it, try to make our politics better. There's some law that's passed here, Mueller versus Oregon. It's a law that's going to limit women to 10 hours of work. It's kind of a weird, kind of ironic law that in protecting female workers, they're going to basically say that women cannot do the same amount of work that men can, and that there should be different standards for male and female workers. And so instead of forcing females to work maybe a 12-hour day or longer, that women should only get a 10-hour day. And this is going to be kind of interesting argumentation. Later on, it's going to be seen as discriminatory to women, but the heart of the law is to try to, protect working hours for women and give them less hours to give them a better home life. Labor in the law, there's all kinds of stuff that's going to be going on here. In general, I think something to highlight is that labor in the United States is going to be way more sympathetic to women than it is in other parts of Europe, okay? And those guys are going to have really strong labor movements, across the Atlantic, much stronger than I think than ours. And definitely ours are going to be much more sympathetic to women and by inference also to children. In 1905, labor is going to experience a setback here. The Supreme Court's going to invalidate a New York law that established that 10-hour workday for bakers. And so, the inference there is that you could also extend that to other workers, that 10-hour day, and that's going to be invalidated. So you're still going to have this struggle between labor and management like you always do, but that's a pretty big case to kind of keep in mind. You never know when something like that's going to pop up on a test, all right? A huge reform movement that's going to gain a lot of speed here in the late 1800s and early 1900s is the Women's Christians Temperance Union, the WCTU. These ladies are going to start to really get a lot of influence and political power. It's going to be the world's largest organization of women. So these guys are going to have a lot of power and influence. And ultimately, they are going to be so influential in getting the 18th Amendment passed in the United States, which is the Prohibition Amendment. And it's probably not going to be any coincidence then that the 19th Amendment will be the one that gives women the right to vote. So, pay attention to the WCTU and, that idea of reform and, and trying to get the United States to get behind this idea of prohibiting alcohol. It's a huge social experiment, and it's another idea of, the government solving society's ills. All right, square deal for labor. There's a mention of a coal strike in 1902. I believe these Pennsylvania strikers strike in the middle of winter, and bad time to strike, or maybe a good time if you're a worker, because you know you're going to get maybe what you ask for. Teddy Roosevelt is going to take the workers' side, and he's going to threaten to take over the coal mine. It's going to be government involvement, getting involved here and taking the workers' side and giving the workers a fair deal, okay, or a square deal, as he would call it. 1903, we're going to create the Department of Labor and Commerce. Teddy Roosevelt is known as the trust buster, and so he's really going to kind of go against, the corporations in a lot of ways. The ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, these guys are going to be supposed to regulate railroads and big business. They might be a little too weak to do the job well initially, but they will gain power later on, okay? There's mention of the Elkins Act in 1903. It's a law passed by Congress to impose penalties on railroads. It's also going to strengthen the Interstate Commerce Act. So pay attention to that. Then the Hepburn Act is going to piggyback on that and add free passes to that list of railroad, no-nos that you can't do. Like I said a minute ago, Teddy Roosevelt is known as the trust buster. His biggest trust-busting case is the Northern Securities Trust. That's run by two guys, J.P. Morgan and James Hill from Minneapolis. It's interesting, TR gets this really kind of cool nickname, but he doesn't bust many trusts. He sees that big business is there to stay, and so he kind of tries to make a point of going after the bad trusts, in his opinion, but then, keeping maybe the good trusts going. But then that message then to the good trusts or the big businesses that he thinks are good is that, they better stay in line or they might be next. All right. I think this guy is super important in Chapter 28. Upton Sinclair, super, super important guy. He is a socialist, okay, who is going to take a job in Chicago. He wants to write a pro-socialist novel to get people to really kind of get behind the socialist movement in the United States. And the method that he uses is that he is going to, kind of describe the plight of slaughterhouse workers in Chicago. He takes a job in a slaughterhouse himself to get research for his novel, and the graphic nature in which he, describes the slaughter process here in 1906 is so disgusting that people kind of lost sight of his socialist message and really started to have their stomachs be turned by his description of the slaughter process. And so this will be so influential because it leads to the development of two major entities in the United States, two pieces of legislation: the Meat Inspection Act, all right, which all of a sudden says that all animals who are going to be slaughtered and all that meat that is going to be produced from slaughterhouses has to be inspected by federal officers before it's fit for human consumption. And then the next one is the Pure Food and Drug Act, which basically says that people have to label what is in their products if they're making packaged products for human consumption. And this is still why if you look at every packaged item today that you eat, if it comes in a wrapper or a box or a can, there's a list of ingredients on it, from the most prevalent to the least prevalent, and that's so you know exactly what's going into your food. And both of those acts, the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act, those are directly attributable to Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle. All right. And then we're also going to create the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to try to test the safety of all of these things that people are going to ingest. All foods, all drugs, they have to be tested to be, deemed safe for people to consume. So these are landmark laws.
Excuse me for the interruption. One quick announcement.
All right, sorry about that little interruption. I'm about out of time today. I like to try to keep these videos under 15 minutes, and I've been doing a lot of talking, so I'm going to let you go. I will probably try to add another video here to try to get the latter half of Chapter 28 in my presentation. But as it is now, this is pretty good stuff for a start. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helped you learn something, and I'll just see you next time. All right, take care.